you go.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Hey, everybody. There we are, then.
Let's dance, and that's no idle invitation, ladies and gentlemen, because it comes from Benny Goodman and his orchestra, who take their responsibilities very seriously in purveying good music to the dancing public. And now, an original arrangement by Benny Goodman of Jingle Bells.
Hey, Octavio. Hey, Susan. Hey, Wisp. Down at Rossi's? All right. Hey, Cindy. Evening, Laura. Everybody's so exhausted? All right. Look, they're saying in the chat. Yeah. Hey, Heather. Hey, everybody. Miles has been, like, lurking around here until it was time to actually start. Oh, I want to say hi. TV. He knows when the computer comes up here, he's going to get some attention. Hey, Kathleen. I assumed there would not be a euphonium section working tonight. Glad the euphonium is still there. Hey, Wisp, we'll see you later then. Hello, Miles. Ember likewise has been playing with everything inside and investigating everything inside all night, but as soon as it's time to be on TV, she's gone. Oh, here she comes. Hey, Marita. Hey, Megan. There's Miles. There. Jenna's here, too. There's little Ember.
She's trying to eat the dishes.
Yeah. She does that. It doesn't matter how much wet food I just gave her. Hey, Dad. Hey, Lorena. Hey, Timberly. Hey, Susan. Ember's now just going to hang out a little bit over on the green chair. Hey, Mom. Hey, Florecita and Marita. Hey, happy holidays all around. This is not what the opening was supposed to be. Did Miles just actually move the scene? Miles, did you do that? Can you do that?
Now, Benny Goodman playing Where Am I?
Hey, Mackenzie. Hey, Rainey. Welcome along, everybody, especially anybody new out there. Hey, Joanne. We do this every Thursday when I'm in town. Oh, Miles found the catnip again. evening, everybody. Welcome along. This is Benny Goodman playing live at the Congress Hotel just over 90 years ago. Elaine, yes. Hope everybody enjoyed a day of peace, blessings, and love. Yeah, Christmas. Pat, hey, Chris. Hey, everybody. Hey, Norma. Hey, Leah. Good to have you. Hey, Bob. Evening, everybody. Hey, Georgia. I'm going out 80s dancing on Saturday. What should I wear? Hey, everybody. Hey, Gene. Hey, everybody out there. Out there in streaming land. Hey, all you folks out there.
And that was Helen Ward singing, appearing more bewilderingly lovely than bewildered. And now, an unforgettable Irving Berlin tune, You Forgot to Remember.
Hammer time. I feel like I'm missing something there, Dad. Hey, Crazy Nights, the Hanukkah bar. We had a good time, yeah. Hey, Jim. Thanks, everybody, coming out tonight. Never know whether I should really run on big holidays like this. It's also hard to tell if we're running or not right now. The machine doesn't indicate as much, but the chat does. Hey, Sherry. Hey, everybody. We're going to let Benny Goodman do a little bit more here while everybody gets online. We'll start with Lost Stories from Chicago History. It's really from the first couple of years of mini tours. Lynn, how much laundry did you have to fold? Now we're bombing somebody? Great. Hey, Sarah. Lynn, okay, that is a lot of laundry. Rearrange some of the lighting in here a little bit.
And now here is the jazz Series E sons of the program. Joe Harris presenting that immortal...
Hey, Robert.
The music goes around and around.
We're going to let this song finish up, then we will get going. Welcome along, everybody, especially anybody new who might be out there. We do this about every Thursday. This is a particular tour that I haven't done in a few years. Luckily, I took good enough notes on it, because a lot of times I research these stories, then like the next week, if I haven't written anything else about it or started telling it on tours, it's gone. Well, hey, remember that part in Rose Hill Cemetery I was at yesterday? Gold mine. I started looking the people up. I was like, now I know where I knew that guy's name. That guy's got a good backstory. I haven't even gotten to everybody yet. I haven't had that much time. Welcome along, everybody. We're finishing up this Benny tune, and then we'll get started. Happy Christmas, Stina. I'd say war is over if you want it, but apparently it's not. Ember, what are you meowing about over in here? No, is that Miles? Ember's down here, getting high. Ember was introduced to catnip yesterday, courtesy of Jenna. Well, really courtesy of Bob Dylan. See, she got me this this Dylan catnip. Taken right around the time, this picture would have been right around the time that Dylan introduced the Beatles to marijuana. Oh yes, there's a Chicago flag one too, but it's not within arm's reach. Yeah, not as strong. That was Marty. Marty Supreme was wildly entertaining. Evening, Grandma Bell. Okay, I think it's about time we get started here. All right, Benny's wrapping it up there. That means it is time for us to go ahead and get started. Welcome along, everybody. Oh, I still have that picture up. All right, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I have been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for over 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, and most recently, Chicago's Serial Husband, The Marriages and Murders of Johann Hawk. Now, this is up for Best New Book by a Chicagoan over on Chicago Reader's Best of Chicago issue. Voting is still open for about another 6 days on this, so go over to chicagoreader.com. Please do throw it a line, throw it a vote. There's only a handful of nominees. It's an honor just to be nominated. But okay, in addition to the books, I'm on television all the time. I am, in fact, incredibly famous. But you know, about 6 years ago now, it was almost 6 years ago that we started doing these morning mini tours every single day. Just about every day at 10 o'clock, I am out there talking about a grave or some architecture or something interesting that I come across. Sometimes I just have to improvise. Sometimes I plan ahead better than other days. But there's always something new to find, always something new to explore. And in the process of that, just looking up different stories to tell about, especially in those first couple of years when I could commute further because there wasn't much traffic during the pandemic, now and then you'll come up with all these stories that somehow, even with years as a researcher, I'd never really heard of. I might have seen a reference to it someplace, but never saw it really explored. So this is just kind of a compilation tour. It seemed like a good one to throw up for a holiday when I had no idea how many people were actually going to be out there, who was going to be hitting that donate button down below or joining the Patreon. But here are some of the coolest stories that we've found in the first couple of years there. One is this place over on Berry. This is just down in the Lakeview neighborhood. It's one of those cases where the house is actually still standing. This goes back to 1924 in the neighborhood of Lakeview. This was known as the Torso Murder, with a murderer named Blanche Dunkel. And I just love that name, Blanche Dunkel, bones in the trunkle. But yeah, so this was a whole love triangle. Blanche's daughter, Mally, was died of apparently natural causes, but she had been flirting a lot with but Blanche had been flirting quite a lot with her son-in-law, Irvin. He had moved in with her on Waveland Avenue, and they started sleeping together about twice a week, him and his mother-in-law. Then Irvin got engaged to another person. Blanche decided to have him killed. Hired her friend Evelyn Smith, who was often said to have been a burlesque dancer in the old days. So she got this guy, Irvin, drunk, then strangled him in the house. That's this house down below here on Berry, and planned to take him out to the lake, but he was too heavy. So instead, she went to a hardware store, left the body here in the interior, and got herself a hacksaw for his legs. Now, she had either a husband or a foster brother, a Chinese man. Exactly her relationship to him depends on which source you're reading. But he helped dump the dead body the two took off. The body was found in a trunk in Hammond, Indiana, and traced back to Blanche Dunkel, who cracked very quickly. Now, Evelyn was rumored to have been a suicide in the river, but was found in New York. Laughed at the stories about the burlesque. Said she'd been emigrated from Germany, adopted by a North Dakota couple, but then was just forced to wash the other kids' underwear. So she ran away, hopping trains and working laundry jobs for decades, cleaning lots of people's underwear. Now, this is a picture of the death chair being taken out. This is where Irvin was strangled. And there's almost always a picture like this in crime scene pictures. Everybody around seems like they're just having a jolly old time. Like the guy over here to the left of the cop looks like he's having a blast moving furniture to begin with. The guy over to the left looks like he's just having the time of his life. Guy behind him looks like he is actively partying. You see this a lot. People gather around these crime scenes just like, hey, I'm going to be in the newspaper story about this. Blanche and Evelyn were both sentenced to 180 years in Dwight Women's Prison, but there was a weird little thing that every year they had to be in a room together for a while. And this is Evelyn in the 1950s, about 30 years after the fact. She was still working as a seamstress in the place. Blanche had eventually been paroled in the 1960s. I don't think Evelyn ever actually was. This is one of the cases they would bring up in the 1920s, that women convicted of murder in Chicago never got the death penalty. Some of them got convicted, but never actually ended up getting carried out. This was kind of a feminist point in Chicago in the 1950s, as they thought that women were being treated like shrinking violets, not like people mature and responsible for their own actions. So let's move on to another one here. We'll just go out to the lake for this one. Now, there are several shipwrecks in the world that are really only known to real shipwreck fans. They're not famous ones like the Titanic or even the Edmund Fitzgerald. They're pretty minor shipwrecks, but people who are really into shipwrecks all know about them. People certainly do exist like that. We're going to go to February of 1915. There was a ship called the SS Iowa. Now, in February of 1915, boat traffic on the lakes had been pretty quiet. There had been too much ice. It hadn't really been safe. But at one point, the crew of the Iowa decided that they had enough of a thaw that they could sail down from Wisconsin to Chicago. They had an icebreaker ship they were seen go up ahead of them and left carrying about 70 people, 69 sailors and a matron. The papers vary a little bit. The matron was a woman named Lizzie Smith. There was also some guy who was just randomly a passenger. But the ship ended up getting busted up in the ice and stranded about somewhere between 1.5 and 3 miles east of Grand Avenue in Chicago. So it got all the way back down into the heart of Chicago, really, but then couldn't quite make it closer to the shore. In fact, eventually the thing was stuck in the ice and broke up inside of the ice. You can see it here just surrounded by it. So what do you do in a shipwreck like this where your ship just gets stranded in the ice? And really what they did was they walked back. They walked the rest of the way to the Grand Avenue Pier, later known as Municipal Pier and later known as Navy Pier. Now, this 1.5 mile to 3 mile trek on the ice ended up taking about 8 hours. They had to walk pretty carefully. They had to hop over some pretty big gaps. But eventually they just spread out as much as they could to distribute the weight across the ice and managed all of them to get home safely and in one piece. Now, the shipwreck is out there in the water someplace. They decided that it sank. They decided it was a navigation hazard and just blew it up under the water. One person who has checked out the shipwreck says that it looks kind of like it was been blown to hell and back, an underwater junkyard several hundred yards wide. Like it was burned, crushed, sank, and then stepped on by Godzilla twice. The captain said that she was crushed by the ice like an eggshell. It was leaking badly, so they set a wireless for tugs, but the boat sank before any of them could come. They did manage to get photographers out there, though, before it could sink. It was very interesting. The wheelman said that he had dreamed of a black cat, so he knew that there was going to be trouble. This is the captain himself, Captain Stufflebeam. What a great name. But while we are talking of shipwrecks, let's just go over here to the Lakewood Balmoral Historical District. We just went to this place again recently. As I talked about this guy a couple of times, wanted to go check out the house again. When this house was built, it would have been a duplex identical on either side, but they redid one of the porches and added a second floor onto the other, so it's a little bit off now. But this, in the 1920s, was the home of this guy below me, Charles Williams. He was a champion squash player, and he was sailing over to New York in 1912 to be in a squash championship game against a guy named George Standing. And the fastest way he could get across the ocean was to book a passage on a ship that had a squash court, the Titanic. So by the time that the Titanic hit the iceberg, he was practicing in the squash room. By the time it really started sinking, he had gone back to the smoking room. Now, somehow he survived. Very few adult men really survived the Titanic. His story later was that he had treaded water for about 3 hours before a ship finally came to pick him up. That strikes me as unlikely. That's apparently what he told George Standing, his squash opponent, when he finally showed up. I get mixed reports on whether the match ever actually even happened. But the more likely scenario is when they were loading up the lifeboat, somebody on the crew said, "Hey, you're that squash champion. We need help rowing." So this is the guy who was brought in to help row, and it was the one ship that he was on, the lifeboat, was the only one that actually went back to pick people up from the debris site. So if Rose Dawson in the Titanic movie had been a real person, this is the guy who saved her. Now, his nerves were shot after this, and he didn't really play much squash after this. He ended up settling in Chicago, working as a tennis instructor. But he eventually regained his title again in squash before his death in 1934. He is now in the rarely seen north section of Rose Hill Cemetery. Yeah, we have looked up where this next guy is buried. He's at Memorial Park in Skokie. We're over here in Evanston, just on the lakeshore, across from the Charles Dawes house, is this really cool house that doesn't quite know if it wants to be a Tudor or a Greystone or a Queen Anne. Very large house in any case. This was the home of the Churches. Now here is Ralph Church over on the right-hand side, bearing more than a passing resemblance to that one guy from Beavis and Butthead who always had a sock puppet. But this was Congressman Ralph Church. Now, in the 1950s, his doctors told him to avoid too much excitement. So what did he go and do? He went and made a speech to the House Committee on Executive Expenditures objecting to the way that Truman's reorganization plan would eliminate the Office of General Counsel to the National Board of the Office of Labor Relations. This speech was too much excitement. The guy actually died in the middle of a sentence while he was making this speech. I have sometimes said that he heroically died of too much excitement before anybody else could die of boredom on this thing. Now, his wife, Marguerite, ended up taking over his seat in Congress, and it wasn't just as a placeholder either. She served for quite a long time. She was, in a period when Evanston was reliably conservative, she was also actively supportive of civil rights. She opposed a Southern amendment saying that any civil rights case had to automatically go to a jury trial, even if it was just a fine, because she knew what a Southern jury would do in something like that. Nobody would ever get convicted of a civil rights violation down in the South. That's the kind of thing you'd never see conservatives say now, but this kind of goes back to a time not only when Evanston was reliably conservative, but also when things like civil rights and abortion support weren't really that closely tied to party affiliation, which is really remarkably recent. So let's move across town a little bit. Over here in what is now really Indiatown on Washtenaw was the home of a detective that I really talk about quite a lot around here, Detective Sergeant John W. Norton. Pictured here fairly late in his career. He got his start, first really made the news investigating the H.H. Holmes murder castle back in 1895. He was one of the leads on that investigation. Got a little bit better at investigating after that. He was eventually the chief of detectives in the Al Capone era. And we did actually find his grave. He's out at All Saints in, I think that town is Des Plaines. Here's a picture of his grave with a long shadow being cast over it of a guy in an overcoat and a fedora. That detective look, you know. I always thought that was a cool shot. But one of his cases, he's connected to pretty much all of the big murder cases of the 1910s and the 1920s, and really going back a little further than that as well. One we covered here was a guy named Harvey Church. This is Harvey Church. Harvey was a railroad worker. You couldn't really say he was hard up. His parents had a home in Wisconsin and another down here in Chicago. But then in 1921, he decided he was crazy about getting a 1921 Packard. Now, these were fancy automobiles at the time. These cost $5,400 in 1921 money. That's like, 150 grand today. Definitely look better than a Cybertruck anyway. So he went to a bank at 37th in Michigan, told them that he could get the money from Liberty Bonds, and 2 dealers went with him to go to the bank. Shortly thereafter, their bodies were found in the river, brutally beaten, still wearing jewelry and carrying cash. Now, Norton tracked Harvey Church here to Wisconsin and arrested him without much trouble, but while they were interrogating him, they found other murder weapons and blood in the basement and a shallow grave out back. A guy had been beaten, choked, and possibly buried alive, all to get a new car. Now, Church, right after confessing to the crime, kind of went catatonic. Now, one of the police officers present made some sort of flip remark about, we just got to talk about your necktie party. And he said, I will not be present at my execution. Now, whether that part of the story is really true or not, I could never find a reliable source, but we do know is that shortly after confessing, he just went catatonic. They tried everything to wake this guy up or get him to respond, and nothing worked. They eventually had to carry him out onto the scaffold and hang him like that. It was the kind of, if he was just trying to fake something, he was doing a really, really remarkable job of it. A lot of people tried to feign insanity, just a lot of people. A lot of them kept up the act really well for a long time. In this case, they still couldn't figure out what this guy was doing. It was he would occasionally talk about hypnosis every now and then, but that's not really something that works quite this well. All right, but let's move on a little bit. We'll move way up to the north side here. Hey, this is just about the neighborhood where I live now. It wasn't when I first filmed this. But this house, still standing here in Rogers Park over on Lunt Avenue, was the home. We can actually match it to an old photo here that ran in the Chicago American. This was the home of a young doctor named Oliver Hart. Oliver B. Hart, shown here looking like a respectable young man, shown here looking not like a respectable young man, looking like somebody that even the people in the horror movie would generally know to stay away from. Now, Dr. Hart had moved into this house in 1905 and adopted a teenage girl. Now, this teenage girl was only about a year younger than his wife. His wife, Mrs. Hart, had been engaged to him when she was 14, married at 15, was now about 16, and they had adopted a 15-year-old girl. Now, this girl's sister, Irene, was living in an orphan's home. She hadn't been adopted along with her sister, but came to visit one day in 1905. Mrs. Hart decided to take the girls shopping, but Irene wasn't feeling well, so she stayed back. A couple hours later, Dr. Hart made a frantic phone call saying that Irene had died. Now, he wrote out a will himself and took what he thought was an overdose of morphine. His story was that, but it didn't plan out. His story was that he had been on the lawn, found Irene eating what she thought was candy, but was actually some of his morphine that he kept around because he was an addict. She had passed out. He tried other drugs to revive her, but it was too late. Now, this didn't strike a lot of people as entirely realistic. He was arrested very quickly. Now, here's Mrs. Oliver Hart, his teenage bride. Here is Irene, the girl who was found dead inside of the place. So, immediately he confessed to murder. And there were stories going around that they had found pictures of young girls all over his apartment. But the thing is, there were no obvious signs of assault or anything. The story about them finding all these pictures in his house were never really backed up. We got to remember, we are dealing with the Chicago police of 1905. It's very difficult to know how seriously to take any of this stuff. You've got Coroner Hoffman, who would have, once this had come out in the papers, he absolutely would have fudged any autopsy to get the results that he was looking for. But for a few days, as you can see, this was really this was really front page news. So he confessed. What his later said was that they told him if he confessed, he wouldn't be hanged. They'd just give him life in prison. Now, That turned out not to be a deal that the judge had been let in on in the first place, and he continued to try it as a death penalty place. But Oliver was found to be what they called an imbecile at the time. He was sentenced to 45 years in jail instead. Vera, his wife, was said to be laughing all the way through the court case. Took a break through to call it downtown about a skirt that she'd ordered. There's differing accounts of what she was like during the trial. Some say she was laughing, others say she was sobbing and making a scene. In any case, her mother took her back to St. Louis, where she managed a stationery shop and eventually organized volunteer organizations. Oliver himself was in jail for a really long time and eventually became a florist in jail. He was let out and worked as a florist in New York at the end of his life. Another one. I've since been able to been a lot closer to that place. I got a few more things that I've been able to add to this since the first time we covered it anyway. Let's talk a little bit about the Drake Hotel. Here we got the Drake Hotel. And here we got a couple of the guys who were captured in a really daring robbery of the Grape Hotel. So the Drake Hotel, 1925, and this place was only a couple of years old. There were a group of what we would have called hobos then, who all ended up working in Chicago, working lousy jobs for as long as they could stand them. 5 of these guys all ended up living at a hotel together in Uptown, and one of them, known only as the Texas Kid, who worked as a waiter at the Drake, suggested that they rob the place. So July 30th, 1925, they got really drunk on port, 5 of them, busted into the place and shouted, "We're from Texas!" Like you do when you're robbing a place. Now, the 5 of them got about $10,000 in cash plus a bunch of valuables, but as they fled, 2 of the 5 were killed. 1 ran off with the money after killing one of the patrons. The other 2 bandits, these guys, were caught. Now, Joe Holmes said that he had become a hobo when he caught his wife with another man. He had admitted that he probably did it, but he was too drunk to remember for sure. This is the kind of excuse that occasionally did manage to save people from the gallows. It did not save these 2 guys from the gallows. Well, when we talk about these kind of things, you know, in those days, hanging was still very common in Chicago. And the argument at the time was about the same as now, that it would stop, that having the death penalty would deter people from crime. But this is kind of ignoring the fact that most of the guys who were engaged in really dangerous crimes in Chicago had a lot more to worry about than the state coming after them. For instance, other gangsters were a much bigger threat than the police were. So this is out at Oakwood Cemetery. It's a memorial to a grain elevator explosion, but right where that Citgo is, you see over here the Citgo station? That was the site of the Granada Cafe at 68th and Cottage Grove. Here it is after they busted up some of the gambling equipment inside of this place. Look at this, you see like roulette wheels and stuff. You can just imagine the manager saying, "Shocked, I am shocked to find gambling going on here." So, New Year's Eve 1928 into 1929, Guy Lombardo and his orchestra were playing here on a live broadcast on WBBM. They were playing the song "King for the Day." Seated at a side table nearby, it's kind of a spoiler in the headline here, was Stubby McGovern and a guy by the name of Gunner McFadden. Now, while they were sitting at their table, while Guy Lombardo was playing, somebody just came in and shot them. By most accounts, they just waltzed in, shot them, and waltzed back out. Nobody even stopped dancing. Now, the next day when this story hit the papers, a lot of people were calling in to say they had heard the murder live on the radio. Now, WBBM said it wasn't actually broadcasting at the time that it was the time of the shots were fired, but really, who knows whether that was true or not. There's no recording of that particular broadcast that I've ever been able to find, but we can really easily imagine people like listening in, finding out what happened the next day, and said, "I thought I heard a weird noise," and it was maybe just a drum or something. But Gunner and Stubby here were part of the Bubs Quinlan gang, who worked for, they worked as part of the North Side racket. Guy was, both of them had told on a couple of people later as well. Bubs was just a minor beer baron. He was eventually shot himself just a few blocks up on Cottage Grove in a restaurant called the Bonsai. By that time, he was broke. Now, Bubs Quinlan by then was a member of a gang called Reagan's Cult, which actually ties it into a murder about 20 years later. In the 1950s, Monty Thorne, heir to the Montgomery Ward name and money, was found dead in a single-room occupancy apartment in the Gold Coast about a week after changing his will to make his fiancée the sole heir. Now, not a lot of 19-year-olds have a will to begin with, and they certainly don't change it suddenly and then mysteriously die a week later. The official story was at first that he had died of drugs, then they decided he'd actually died of pneumonia, but nearly everybody thought there was some kind of foul play involved here. That fiancée was Maureen Reagan, Joe Reagan, the gangster's daughter. He was long dead by then himself. The gangsters had eventually come and shot him down, too. Quinlan's death laid to racket. While we're on the gangster stories, it's amazing how many gangster stories in Chicago just didn't really make it into the books. Partly because it's just so hard to keep track of all of these guys, really. But right here off Grand Avenue, near Grand and Ogden, was Ashcan Pete's place. Ashcan Pete and Sarah, I have no idea why they called him Ashcan Pete, but here at 448 Elizabeth, he was said to have, in addition to running a soft drink parlor here, was operating as just kind of a side gig as a gunman for Bugs Moran and Joe Aiello. July 23rd, 1930, he was shot outside of the cafe. Somebody just pulled up and shot him several times. When the police picked him up and got him in the ambulance, they asked him, "Joe, Pete, do you know who did it?" And he said, "I don't know, but they sure did a good job, didn't they?" Now, Pete was suspected of having killed Pete Plessia, who ran a funeral home a bit east on Grand that was possibly a front for a liquor business. But he wasn't buying supplies for his cafe from a grocery store a couple blocks away on Randolph that was supposed to be owned by Joe Aiello. So he might have been turning his back on Aiello, did something to tick Joe Aiello off. In any case, police just figured they had a falling out, and that was about the end of that. Over here on Sheridan, this wasn't exactly this location wasn't lost. I actually had it on a bus tour years ago, around the time Public Enemies came out. This is an old funeral home where John Dillinger was given his funeral after he was killed by the FBI back in 1934, the most famous bank robber of his day. That's his arm under the sheet right there. It just looks like he's awfully happy to be there. But there was this excellent article, Dillinger's Brain Now Resting in Pieces. They took out his brain and nobody could explain exactly why. Just one thing is sure, outlaw's still dead. So this is an article, one of my favorite headlines ever, from the Chicago Daily Times. The author is Kay Hall. In the 1930s, you're just starting to see individual bylines on newspapers, really. A generation or two before, it was only occasional. Now, Kay Hall herself had done some interesting reporting. Earlier on in the 1930s, she had worked as a cab driver for a while, the only woman cab driver in the city, and wrote that there were actually women who refused to get in the cab if she was driving the thing. Now, but she was a crime writer for Chicago Daily Times for quite a while, moved over to the Chicago Tribune in 1936, married a guy named Gordon Sessions, then vanished and just kept a low profile until her death, which was really very recently. She died in 2004. Now, she's best remembered now for an anecdote that the gangster Roger Toohey once puked all over her shoes, which, if it happened, did not make her column. She once expensed a fur coat that was stink bomb when she went undercover at a communist meeting. Why would you wear fur to a communist party meeting? One of my favorite other things, her husband Gordon Sessions took a trip to Minneapolis to St. Paul one time and went to a place called Mickey's Dunkin' Hour, which is apparently still around. It was a place that encouraged you to dunk your donuts into your coffee. He thinks coffee and donuts. This is an article from the time. He thinks there should be more Mickeys where dunking would be encouraged as a sort of spiritual therapy for over-inhibited city folks. And this article goes on like, yeah, call us when you got another idea, Gordon. Dunkin' Donuts in every city? Sure. Hey, don't call us. We'll call you. Another forgotten gangster coming up here. This is the courthouse. There's just so many stories about the courthouse. I can walk any group there and not even know which story I'm going to tell. Elaine, are you really doing 6-7 out there in the comments? All right. It's not like we didn't have our own generational memes back then. I already showed a Beavis and Butthead clip. So, back in the 1920s, there was a gangster they called the Sheik because he was just so well-dressed, even in an age of well-dressed gangsters. This is Martin Durkin. A guy who sounds like he ought to be the subject of an Irish folk song, like "Goodbye, Martin Durkin, I'm sick and tired of working." So, fresh out of the army, he was beaten up by the cops after a larceny charge. So it may have been PTSD that led him to just want to keep this level of violence up. Not exactly a gangster, but decided he would get his revenge on every cop out there by doing whatever he could to antagonize them. That's the story, anyway. Not exactly a gangster, but he wore flashy clothes and stole only the finest of cars. In 1925, he was trailed by the FBI, which at the time was a brand new organization. One came up to him in a garage here at 63rd Street, and Martin shot him to death. By most accounts, the first FBI agent to die in the line of duty. So Martin Durkin fled. At one point, he left a suicide note and some bloody clothes by the river. Here's a picture of them dragging the river for his body. Just to see if he was actually down there. But really, he just tried a trick that Johann Hawk had done 20 years before and didn't fool anybody with, just leaving a suicide note and some clothes by the riverbank. Now, he had a couple of wives. This is wife number 2, Irma. And this is other wife, Betty. Got married a couple of times. He was lured to Betty's uncle's house, then escaped. The uncle was accidentally killed, got married again, was traveling with Irma at one point. Fond of cross-country travel. There was an interesting interview he did with another woman crime writer, Genevieve Forbes Herrick of the Tribune. Now, he was eventually given a very long jail sentence for all of this stuff. There's a picture of him in his 40s. Over here about 20 years after all of this. There was one news article that said in jail he has become a pretty good 10th-rate plumber. That was his job in jail, was working in the plumbing. One of those guys that people wrote about so much you would just say the Sheik in the 1920s and people would know just who you meant. I've also got a note here, there's something about... Oh, yeah, further down here, there's a picture of... That is Samut Samatuna, the head of the Union Siciliana, and known to be the first guy to be reported to carry guns around in violin cases, just like they do in the movies now. Well, we're talking about people with strange gun habits. Down here on Eastwood Terrace in Uptown, not too far away from that funeral home that we just saw. This was the last home of Two Gun Altery. Now, the newspapers once described him as, this is the story of Two Gun Altery. Louis Two Gun Altery, one-time pugilist, one-time policeman, one-time robber, one-time lieutenant of Johnny Torrio and Dean O'Banion, erstwhile rancher and union business agent, and today the subject of a coroner's inquest as to who shot him and why not sooner. Chicago Daily News. Now, Two Gun Altery was... pictured there on the left. Two Gun Altery was a former boxer and cop in California who came to the north side of Chicago. The story was that the guy that the O'Banion gang had hired to be their hitman was always a big bragger about how quick he was with the gun, but then never actually shot anyone. Now, Two Gun Altery would not have any kind of problem with this. Now, he was a suspect by 1925 of having killed Duffy, that previous hitman who wasn't really doing anything. But right after Duffy had killed his own girlfriend, they took him on a one-way ride and blamed it all on Two Gun Altery. Now, when Dean O'Banion was murdered in 1924, he is said to have gone to the funeral waving guns and threatening to kill, threatening to have a duel on State Street with whoever was responsible for it. So, at one point he was even slapped by a cop for it, they say. Also said to have been involved with Nails Morton. I won't even tell that story. But he flashed around a couple of six-shooters over at the O'Banion funeral, left for Colorado soon after, got into various scrapes for shooting at people, and was known to be a target of the Capone gang, so he just ended up going undercover, working as a rancher for a while. Now, he survived the era, went west, told stories of old rivals meeting up to laugh about the times they tried to kill each other. But then in 1935, when the era of the gangster was really pretty much over, he came back to Chicago and was living here on Eastwood. One day he got a phone call, walked outside, and a couple of guys across the street pumped him full of a dozen bullets. Apparently it was the remnants of the Capone gang who wanted in on the Theatrical Janitors Union, which he was the head of at the time. One newspaper described what he had done as came out of the shadowy memories of the Alky racket just long enough to die. The shooters were in the building at the time. He had come out across the street. Another place still standing. Hey, Luann, glad to have you. We got one more story to go through. This one I'd really like to go through more of the other papers on. 1919. There's only a couple of papers from 1919 that are available online right now. So this was the home of a guy by the name of Elias Purcell. He was, in his era, he was the most famous musician ever to come out of Duluth, Minnesota, in his era. But in 1919, he was kind of down on his luck, hadn't had a hit in a while as a songwriter. And in 1919, he was found in his office, tied to a chair, dead of no apparent cause. The police suspected that maybe he had been scared to death, or if he had somehow willed his own heart to stop. So this was the scene. He was tied up. There was a loose rag over his face. There was broken glass under the floor. There was a table in the dining room had set for 3, which the report with the police said they believed was a camouflage. This was right after World War I. Camouflage was one of the new vocabulary words they had learned that they just couldn't wait to work into a sentence as much as possible. There were also bundles of neatly pinned together found in different parts of the house. The kitchen door was closed but not locked. The key was hanging outside of the door. There were clues all over the place, but nothing could really be found. Now, eventually it turned out that what he had died of was nicotine poisoning. Nicotine as a substance itself, if you take a couple of drops of it, that'll be sufficient to kill you. It was fairly easy to buy at the time. You just had to tell people where you were using it as a pesticide. But it was still so uncommon for people to buy it that the couple of drugstores that had sold any, had a record of it, couldn't trace it back to anything. So the most likely scenario here was that he had died by suicide and made it look like it had been a murder because that meant that the family would get the insurance money, which they wouldn't have done if it had been a suicide. So possibly he had put some nicotine onto that rag himself, tied himself up loosely, but it never quite added up. There were always a lot of things, like, a donut hole and the hole in the middle of the donut, and then another donut there, and then another hole inside of that. They called it the case of 1,000 clues. And I'd really like to I should get into the archives. There's probably a lot more about that. There weren't that many papers from 1919 that have really been digitized. A lot of stuff is still out there and it's just hanging around in microfilm reels and dusty old pieces of paperwork. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I do ask you all to help support me to keep this stuff all going on. Let me move this thing up, especially being on the Patreon. That is really your best bargain these days. But thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. We're just going to put this up. We will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will hang out. I'm glad I could give people something to do on the holiday, on this jolly holiday.
From the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And it is necessary to
Ooh, Martin. Martin says if you murder someone who's bothering you, it's a pesticide. I don't know if it's a good pun. It's a good pun, okay. Fair. Martin, you're absolved. Welcome, everybody. We're now into the post-show hangout. Miles, where'd you go? Oh, yeah? Oh, I see it now. You're watching a dangling toy, but he's just... Yeah. Good night, Heather. Good night, Phoenix. I am very happy, Laura. Hey, Diane. Hey, Lori. Thanks for popping in, everybody. I'm glad to have you all here. Glad to provide entertainment even on the holiday. Is there a website where I find old newspapers? Dean, there are several of them. But a lot of them have not been digitized yet. There's still a lot that I have to go get off of the microfilm reels. And even with the sites that have a lot on, like newspapers.com, Genealogy Bank has quite a few that other sites don't. You gotta know which paper to look at. The easiest thing is just like stick with stuff that's close to the action. Stick with the actual articles where there was a reporter with boots on the ground. Did Tribune reporters have to pay informants? I'm sure they did occasionally. The Chicago American had a whole network of people. Like coroner's deputies would tip them off. Telephone operators at the big hotels would tip them off. It wasn't usually much, though. A scoop would usually get you a couple of bucks, or a box of chocolates or something.
And they loved it, they loved it. You could never enjoy being blue until you hear Benny Goodman play the Basin Street Blues.
You could never enjoy being blue until you hear Benny Goodman play the Basin Street Blues. Hey, Lori, welcome along. Well, we're at the post show now, but happy holidays to you as well. I appreciate the ghost emoji. Thank you, David. Were the subtitles weird, Lynn? Sometimes they can be. They're all auto-generated, you know. Thanks those of you kicking in donations. Most of these stories, if you want to go back through the Patreon, and if you join the Patreon now, you get access to all the stuff that has been posted there these last almost 6 years now. It's a lot of stuff. Hundreds and hundreds of stories. I had an interesting one this week about Vincent DePascal, who was a crime writer turned burglar, who later may have been the reporter who broke the rumor that Hitler was still alive in Argentina. Yeah, all those original articles are included on the Deep Research tier of the Patreon. Happy holidays to you, Sue. Can grandchildren of gunmen be held responsible for the actions of their elder family members? No. Sherry, you are in the clear. Sherry's friend is in the clear. Good night, Marita. Good to refresh my own memory on these things now and then, you know.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward again, singing I've Got a Feeling You're Fooling.
All right, we'll let Helen Ward do one more tune before I take off. I haven't decided what next week's Patreon ought to be about, but I've run into so many news stories lately. I gotta be better at keeping a list. Checking it twice. I'd say find out who's naughty and nice, but this was Mysterious Chicago. Everybody's naughty. I don't research nice people that much. The people on the Patreon are nice, yeah. The people I write about on the Patreon, often not so much. Among the people at that plot at Rose Hill I was looking at yesterday, there's the guy who first reported the plot to steal Abraham Lincoln's body. There's a guy who grew up in a house that was an Underground Railroad stop and was in charge of like driving the wagon every now and then. You guys ought to see some of this jumping that Ember is doing back over here. You want to jump, Ember? She's getting kind of tired out now. She got some special Hanukkah catnip toys. I've been reluctant to introduce her to catnip for a while. My vet said I should wait, but she's old enough now. And she's a smart cat, very curious. Miles has figured out if he just sits on the chair long enough, the toy will come to him. Jim says Merry Christmas, Jenna. Back at you, Jenna. All right, everybody. That was Helen Ward singing with Benny Goodman live at the Congress Hotel back in 1935. That was 12/23/35, so 90 years and 2 days ago. But all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Back tomorrow morning with Find a Grave Friday. Where shall I go? I had a really good idea just the other day. Where was that? Well, I'll find something anyway. Thanks, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can,